Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I'm again joined by Logos to continue our journey through Minch's Moldbug's UR. So we'll see if we can all survive this, everyone. This is going to be a challenging expedition. But we did finish 2007. UR's endorsement for 2008, February 4th, 2008. Since we do have an election coming along here in fair America, I do feel that as a responsible public intellectual, I should make some kind of endorsement. First, I feel that before voting, it is absolutely essential that everyone read this essay and then watch this video. Please do not reverse the order. The process may take half an hour or so, but I feel it will put you in the correct mood for democratic contemplation. What is your goal in voting? Your goal in voting is to affect the real world in a real way. This is the same for any concerted collective action, enlisting the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, writing letters to your congressman, going to Cuba to cut sugarcane, etc. Your logic is a matter of probability, not of plausibility. The tiny influence exerted by your action may be very improbably sway some large-scale event in some meaningful direction. Okay, this is some math speak, Logos. You might want to read this paragraph here.
It's certainly quasi-math speak. Think of it literally as some sort of ethical calculus. You have some linear function g. Why is it linear? Normalized to the range 0, 1, whose domain is a real, imaginary, or possible state of any planet P. Yeah, it's certainly not math. If you're choosing between politicians A and B, consider the possible future in which you voted for A versus the possible future in which you voted for B versus the future in which you didn't vote at all. G. Well, wait a second. Why are we comparing which is higher? How do I know that G is an optimizable function? I mean, I don't get it.
Well, it's Moldbug. I don't know if we're meant to get it.
I mean, the first half of the paragraph is just goofy, really. I mean, he could have just stated that, starting from possible affairs on a planet and just say, we're assuming we have some function which maps to some number based on outcomes. We want to make number go up. It's like a lot of paragraph to say make number go big, I guess.
Okay. Distributed among all possible outcomes, these differences may be very small, but these small differences in probability nevertheless generate a slope, and you can vote by the slope. In many elections, however, there is only one possible outcome. For example, it is clear that John McCain will win the Republican primary tomorrow, e.g. a news blackout is already imposed on his main competitor. These guys certainly don't play with wiffle bats, do they, kids? Therefore, the probability that your vote will change the winner of the Republican primary tomorrow is trivial. The official press's guess of the outcome is trustworthy, not that its predictions are always reliable, but this kind of thing is what it eats for lunch. Therefore, how do I say this? GPA?
Yeah, G of P sub A, G of P sub N.
Okay. Are pretty much equivalent for McCain. If your only reason to vote is to support or oppose McCain, you need not vote. But wait, you say, what about Kantian effects? Isn't my goal in voting to produce a result not just by myself, but in concert with others? Lots of people joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Very few started their own Abraham Lincoln Brigade. It was Operation Venceremos, not Operation Vincere, and so on. To a limited extent, yes, it may be appropriate to calculate what G of P sub A?
Yeah.
G of P sub B and G of P sub N, not just for your own decision to vote for A or B, or not at all, but for the decision of everyone who is thinking like you. Moreover, whatever your beliefs may be, propagating them along with this neat little replicative package certainly helps them spread, at least if one of your vectors is a political system.
Okay, I know what's weird about this now.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, he called G a linear function. The entire point of a linear function is that adding elements to the domain or multiplying them by scalars produces equivalent effects in the range. So if I add two things together, G of A plus B, it's the same as G of A plus G of B. And similarly. But these are possible worlds. This is like P sub A. It's like the planet in which A happens and the planet in which B happens. You can't add planets and multiply them by scalars. Like, what is this? The domain's possible worlds. It doesn't even make sense to talk about linear functions on a domain like that. Sorry, a bit of a digression, but I couldn't figure out why my head was hurting until now. So there you go.
No, that makes sense. However, this logic cannot apply to tomorrow's election because there is no way this meme can transmit itself virally before tomorrow. Most people that believe in you vote, your goal is to compare G of P sub A versus G of P sub B, where P sub A is the planet on which A is president, and P sub B is the planet on which B is president. And if you don't really see any difference between P of A and P of B, you shouldn't bother. Obviously, this is because they have not devoted any serious dental attention to the problem of how to vote. While hardly surprising, this hardly suggests that these same folks will both receive and transmit some new explanation of the problem. Moreover, the people who know how the Republican election will come out tomorrow are the press. It is their business to know. It is essential to their continued existence in the present professions they get it right. They keep a close eye on what the people think today, and today the people are for McCain. How they got that way is not of any concern to anyone. I mean, this is a really facile argument to make. First of all, we have that famous picture of Truman holding up the newspaper saying, was it Wendell Willkie won the election?
Right.
The people in the press don't always get it right. And then we have this little thing called 2016 logo.
Yeah. That's why.
The thing is, even before 2016, we had the Truman election.
Yeah. I mean, if people followed the press, nobody would have voted for Trump. Trump wouldn't have won. It would have been a foregone conclusion. Like,
Yes. But again, we already know this, right? Because we already had the Truman election.
Yeah.
Where the press got it wrong, or at least elements of the press got it wrong. They announced that Wendell Willkie won. So, I mean, this is just stupid. Moldbug knows it, right? Because we're not even talking about hindsight. You and I, we've all been through the Trump election.
Right.
We have Truman.
But even then, I'm not saying Moldbug is wrong in hindsight. I'm saying if Moldbug is making a political model, which should be able to reliably talk about politics in the future, and that model makes predictions, 2016 would be a very, very bad prediction of Moldbug's model.
Yes. And most important for the Kantian theory of what people like you will do to work, their polls have to be wrong. If their polls are not wrong, it just means you are a major weirdo. Ergo, don't vote for McCain. Not because McCain is evil or whatever, but just because voting for McCain is a waste of your own weird time. So is voting for anyone else if your only goal is to affect the winner of the primary. Therefore, the only reason to vote in the Republican primary is to produce some non-electoral consequence. Simply put, that's just not true. Trump, but even before Trump, Truman. This is just stupid. Simply putting, the opinions of a large number of motivated people on a record has enormous relevance to our political system. Obviously, the capture of agencies by political minorities of every size, shape, and trade is a major feature of Washington as it is today. So what if it's only 1% of American polistas? This is, of course, only send a message theory, which I endorse fully and will follow myself. Not everything here on UR needs to be surprising and new. The problem in the Democratic primary is much more interesting. Your choice is between candidate H, who would stand out as a colorful in the Brezhnev administration and is famous primarily for her devious bureaucratic ruthlessness, and candidate O, who comes to us as a full-grown, like Aphrodite at Paphos from the baths at Esalen, but is somewhat notable for his connection to racist gangsters and religious freaks, and is also the first American politician in over 60 years whose supporters sound exactly as if they were praying to Hitler. How can we even begin to react to this tasty smorgasbord? We can begin by noticing that since the race is officially undecided, our votes may actually help determine the winner. Therefore, we must simply answer the default question: whose election is most likely to improve the world? I will go with Obama, and here's why. Here we go, Logos. You ready?
He might not be wrong about this, actually. I mean, Hillary was pretty dangerous.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It was Hillary in 2008.
Yeah, it's Hillary. Yeah, candidate H is Hillary. Hillary versus Obama. It's like, you know,
yeah,
you might not be
true.
crazy for siding with Obama here.
That's true. First, the election of the Obama makes the transformation of the president into the Pontifex Maximus of the Potomac much clearer. I think Hillary would have made it clear. If that's going to be the plus ledger, Hillary would have been very clearly Pontifex Maximus.
Yeah, it's the first black guy versus the first woman. I think either of them would have done it. But he was right that the election did transform the office probably irreparably that way.
Under their administration, the Democrats are the party of the professional civil service. Under their administration, Washington basically runs itself. A world in which Obama does what he is obviously good at, delivering sermons, and does not pretend to be, in some sense, managing or governing, is a more honest world and thus a better one. Second, as a good formalist, I believe that power and responsibility should be as close to each other as possible. Ideally, they should be identical. I think that if you could turn the management of WashCourt over to the new desks of the New York Times, we would see a remarkable improvement in the quality of government and probably in the quality of the Gray Lady as well. As Kipling put it, power without responsibility is the prerogative of the harlot through the ages, and the lady's knees are hardly smudgeless. If you should offer us Barabbas, we should demand him, and Barack Obama is no Barabbas. However, none of these answers the really important question, which is how we should vote in November. There may be no time for a proper viral campaign before tomorrow, but surely we can think of something clever for the general election. Well, this is in February, so technically he has like 6 months. My initial suggestion for 2008 is that unless the election is actually close, and perhaps even then, we write in David Petraeus for president and Steve Saylor for VP, these individuals are not running for anything as far as I'm aware, and I'm sure they disagree on quite a few substantive points. But why let that stop us? Perhaps I'll elaborate more on the Petraeus Saylor ticket in another post. Update. Commenters have convinced me that Petraeus is not a good choice. Well, he's an actual winning general, a bizarre phenomenon who's like Polanders have not seen since MacArthur. He has spent a little too much time on campus. You wouldn't want another Eisenhower, and you wouldn't want to be seen as asking for one either. So let's swap him out for an all-blogger ticket with Bill Whittle.
What's wrong with Eisenhower?
I don't know. I don't know.
Eisenhower tried to warn everybody of the military-industrial complex.
Well, and of course, Moldbug is always complaining about how the Democrats were soft on communism. Eisenhower wasn't.
Right.
Right?
I mean, the only bad thing maybe Eisenhower did in hindsight was build the highway system and make America really, really dependent on cars. But I mean, at the time, it just seemed like a good idea. And, given his experiences having to tour all over the country in the military and dealing with really long travel times, you could see why I'd want to do it. So it doesn't seem like nefarious to me.
Right, it's not
balanced out after the fact. Yeah.
I mean, this was a horrible essay. I mean, the bad math analogy to say don't vote, that seems to be it.
I still want to know how the function's linear. Like the domain, how do you add planets? How do you multiply planets by scalars? How do you can't mathematize the domain, so it makes no sense to call the function linear. I don't even know what that means.
Well, that's why you're here, Logos. That's why we have you, because I wouldn't have known how to react to that.
Neither did I for a good 5 minutes. My head was hurting. It took me a while to figure out why. And I'm like, wait a minute. Nobody could beat.
No, but you see, Logos, we don't need to worry about voting because the press just picks the winner, don't you know?
Well, I mean, they don't do it all the time, but they're pretty reliable. So why would we buck the trend?
Yeah, because, just 8 years later, they're going to crap the bed, right? But hey,
What's really funny is I think there was a similar moment in the Democratic primary between Hillary and Obama. I think the narrative at the time, I could be wrong because I was a little young, but I think the narrative at the time was Obama has a bright future, but it's not his time. It almost feels like he was the Ron DeSantis of the Democratic Party back in 2008. It was Hillary's turn. She had a lot of experience. She was, a senator for longer, blah, blah, blah. She had political connections. Obama was an up-and-coming guy. He could get on Hillary's cabinet, and he can kind of work his way up. And it ended up flipping. Hillary was on Obama's cabinet, basically, is how it ended up going. But, that's how weird narrative shifts.
Yeah, the media has generally, I mean, 2008 was a long time ago, but from what I can remember, the media was generally on Hillary's side, and Hillary generally lost.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, well, womp, womp.
Yeah.
Okay, comment policy. You want to skip this, Logos?
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't think we need that. How to read and enjoy bogus history. Wow, is this like a self, mea culpa on Moldbug's part, Logos?
I knew you were going to say that.
February 7th, 2008. Yeah, I mean, everything about Moldbug is bogus history. It's like, hey, guys, here's how to enjoy reading my blog. I thought it would be fun to take a semi-break this week and instead of pontificating in the usual manner, throw in a little more historical reading. Today we'll focus on bogus history. As we have realized here at UR, there is no shortage of Lysenkoist pseudo-historical nonsense at large in the world today. I use the L word because this history is not just accidentally bad, it exists because it serves a political function. Okay. So let me just, before we go any further, Logos, okay, why is history bad? It's because Rockefeller in 1946 started rolling out corporate history, where they're just going to tell it from the perspective that they want. They openly announce it in their 1946, the report, the annual 1946 report. That's why it's bad. And then you had Harry Elmer Barnes in the 40s and 50s write about the historical blackout. Well, let's see if Moldbug actually goes in that direction.
The problem is corporations don't have enough control, Todd. I mean, if corporations just ruled everything, this problem surely wouldn't have persisted.
Well, here's the joke, too, right? Like, Moldbug likes to read a lot of these old right guys. Yeah. But it's the old right guys that actually talk about this.
Yeah, how funny is that, right?
So these are like the people that were like, isolationist, local businessmen, from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I know, right? Okay. A great way to sharpen your ability to detect and neutralize present bad history is to read past bad history. Wait, isn't the entire way of getting over something bad is by finding the good version of it instead?
I don't know. Is he trying to make people immune to it and better at knowing it when they see it, or
refuting it? Yeah, I guess. Yeah. In period, sources are a perfect epistemological sparring partner because they don't really hit back. Hopefully, you, our readers, have become comfortable in their new life on the off-world colonies and adapted to the realization that the gentle democratic seas of objective information, which rocked them so cozily in the sweet, palmy days of youth, are in fact black-whirling, bottomless storm of lies. Who wants to live in a bottomless storm of lies? So there's a strong temptation to just not look at the news. But if we have learned anything, we have learned that we have no reliable source of news. So the art of reading nonsense matters, and it never gets easy. Once your brain detects that an entire school of thought is in fact best classified as canting manipulative tripe, a sort of allergic reaction sets in that makes the stuff physically painful to read. Perhaps worse is the realization that the material is created for an audience and the audience is more or less buying it. The sense of being outnumbered by one's enemies produces a deep reflex terror in the hominid brain, and there is an endless nagging temptation to give in, to go with the flow, to believe. None of these responses are triggered by period Kant. Old Kant does not exist to manipulate you. It exists to manipulate people who are now dead. We can ooh and ah, and maybe even shed a little tear over what damage it did, but the virus is inactive. Of course, old writing that is not Kant, but the unmistakable product of perspective and independent mind is much more fun to read. I do hope everyone reads the Charles Francis Adams Jr. essay, An Underdeveloped Function, that I linked to the other day. I know it is long, but I'm afraid it's pretty much required. I would not say an underdeveloped function is entirely free from Kant, quite the contrary. It is instantly identifiable as a product of its era. It illustrates the tremendous difficulty of stepping outside history to look back at it. Nor are Adams' conclusions in any way infallible. In fact, I don't think it all unfair to describe the remedy he proposes as disastrous. But as a portrait of the American political system after the Civil War, I have not seen its like. Its attitude towards history is absolutely timeless, and its author is clearly in possession of many real facts about heaven and earth that are far, far outside the philosophy of present-day heirs at the AHA. Who was Adams anyway? Lowicki is regrettably terse, but it includes this fine photograph of the man in his element, third from the left. Suffice it to say that Charles Francis Adams Jr. was the grandson and great-grandson of Presidents John Quincy Adams and John Adams, the son and heir to politician and diplomat who was almost president himself, Charles Francis Adams Sr., a brigadier general in the Union Army, a prominent and successful railroad lawyer and regulator, a prominent and successful railroad executive, a prominent and successful historian and biographer. In other words, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I'm particularly fond of the fact that unlike his more famous brother, Henry, CFA did not spend his entire working life as an intellectual. Perhaps I'm being fanciful, but I suspect that his stint in the productive sector gave him an unusual perspective on politics and political history. I don't always agree with him, but when he errs, I find it worth wondering why. If you enjoy an underdeveloped function, congratulations, you're probably a weirdo like me. Some other CFA essays you might enjoy are a couple of retrospectives on the Civil War. Shall Cromwell have a statue, 1902, and 'Twas 60 Years Since, 1913. The Young CFA is on display in a lovely collection, which I have only read a small part of, a cycle of Adams' letters. But there are extras. If you have an hour or two to spare, click away. This week, though, we are going to look at some genuine, undiluted period cant as produced by two authors whom literary history has quite fashionably forgotten, Chauncey Depew and Quentin Reynolds. Periodically, Depew was a very ordinary orator and a politician of the Unionist period, and Reynolds was a very ordinary journalist and broadcaster of the New Deal period. It is only the unusual writers whose work survives, but it is only from their hack competitors that we can gain a sense of what the average citizen of the time actually thought. Take a look at Depew's oration on the 100th anniversary of Washington's inauguration. In case the page links get screwed up, this is the first piece in his orations after dinner speeches. Like Adams, Depew is delivering a summary of the American history. There the resemblance ends. The piece is long but quite skimmable, I think you'll find. Have you ever been to a park in an old American city and looked at some of the monuments from the 1860s through the 1890s? Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn is a good example. The style can only be described as high unionist, and this is precisely the term I would use for Depew. His history of America is simply garbage. I can find no other word to describe it, and almost every sentence incorporates some horrendous lie, preposterous misinterpretation, or bombastic boast. The teleology by which the Great Union was formed, the flame shooting through the Cimmerian darkness, is so ahistorical that it actually exerts a strong comic effect, at least for me. But perhaps I have been spending too much time with this stuff. If Depew's first oration leaves you craving more, by all means continue to read the second, The Political Mission of the United States. In case you don't get it and wonder what all Depew is lying about, I have found no better starting point than Lucky's American Revolution. In any case, I feel that Depew is a good candidate for a new SI unit of Lysenko's history. The Depew will be a little like the Farad one, Depew being a heroic level seldom equaled. I'm not saying that it is impossible to produce a confection of nationalist cant that surpasses Chauncey himself. Certainly, if you look at the Soviet bloc, the Nazis, or the Third World giants abound. But I see few American writers who routinely exceed the Depews. The interesting question is to ask while reading Depew is, where did this stuff come from? How could people have possibly not only swallowed this brand of guff, but actually fought a war for it? And what exactly is the relationship between Depewian high unionism and the various flavors of nation-worshipping tribe to which our countrymen subscribe today? Now let me type in some Quentin Reynolds. Here is the start of his chapter 6 from his 1944 collection of wartime columns, The Curtain Rises. A lot of this product moved. You can still get it for less than $1 plus wine, tax and tip. Very typical World War II wartime journalism. Note especially the demotic tinge of the writing. So opposite Depew, Reynolds is clearly writing down to a mass market audience. My copy is marked property of U.S. Navy, and I imagine it did its time on some bulkhead or other. Our chapter is entitled Poland Believed Goebbels. Readers unfamiliar with this modern interpretation of the events described herein may consult the wiki. By we, Reynolds means himself and his fellow international correspondents in Moscow. This piece is dated June 1943. Late last April, Dr. Goebbels announced on his radio that the bodies of 10,000 Poles had been found buried near Smolensk. He charged that these bodies had been identified as Polish officers listed as missing since the Russian occupation of eastern Poland in 1939. Dr. Goebbels charged that the Poles had been executed by the Red Army and tossed into the graves, which the German army had now discovered. When we first heard this, we listened constantly to the German radio because it came to us so clearly. We yawned and switched over to the Rome station. It was, we thought, just another one of the good doctor's bedtime stories, but he hammered away at it again and again. He suggested that the International Red Cross be sent to Smolensk to see for itself. We laughed at that, too. To begin with, Russia was not a member of the International Red Cross. Then, too, we knew that any Red Cross commission sent to the occupied territory around Smolensk would see exactly what Goebbels wanted it to see and nothing else. It was an absurd suggestion in line with the Goebbels tactics of the past 4 years. Then we were shocked to see that the Polish government in London was actually taking this story seriously. We heard on the BBC that Vladimir Kot, former professor of law at the University of Krakow, later Polish ambassador to Russia and now Minister of Information in London, had published a statement by the Polish Minister of War denouncing the atrocity. This was followed by an official request by the Polish government that the Red Cross be allowed to investigate. There was an old Russian saying, "What's the use of being a Pole if you can't be stupid?" The clarity with which the Polish government in London so stupidly walked into the Goebbels trap makes us wonder if perhaps the proverb didn't have some meaning. Whether the atrocity story were true, and Goebbels never produced proof that it was true, the Poles certainly did everything that they could do to handle it in the most undiplomatic way possible. The diplomacy of the Poles is as subtle as the path of a Mark VI tank through a flower garden. For years, the Russian-Polish pot has been simmering dangerously, and this incident caused the lid to pop right off. On May the 8th, we were all called to the Foreign Office and handed a copy of a letter sent to the Polish ambassador Romer by Molotov that afternoon. This marked the end of the Russian-Polish diplomatic relations, though there was some doubt at first whether this was a mere suspense of relations or a definite break. The letter was given to us in Russian, and the conclusion arose in regard to the wording used. All the correspondents, translating freely, wrote that the diplomatic relations had been broken off by the Soviets. The censors refused to allow this to go through. They insisted that the boys use the word suspended. They pointed to the word in Molotov's letter. The word was pererivat, which by dictionary definition means to suspend. The word porvayat, to break, was not used. The censors insisted. However, it all came to the same thing. Alexander Worth, Majori Shah, Ralph Parker, and 2 or 3 others who knew the Polish ambassador well hurried to his embassy. Ambassador Romer has been a charming, well-liked member of the diplomatic corps. Romer is the ideal diplomat, a great rarity in a Pole. He is smooth, tactful, and he has the knack for seeing the other man's viewpoint. Even that night, he never lost his temper. He was sad at having to leave. He regretted the whole incident exceedingly, but he emphasized the courteous treatment he had always received from the Soviet officials. He would leave in the morning, he said. He would not comment on the attitude the government in London had taken, but he told Alexander Worth that he did not for a moment believe that Goebbels' story of 10,000 dead Polish officers. Worth and the others hurried to send the story, but the censors refused to allow them to quote Romer. "We do not have diplomatic relations between Russia and Poland at the moment," Paluganov explained. "Therefore, Romer is not an ambassador. He is merely a private citizen, and you cannot quote him." That was, I regret to say, typical of the petty bureaucracy we were exposed to from Paluganov and his censors. The quote from Romer would have helped Russia enormously, but unfortunately, and despite what so many Americans think, the Russians are the worst propagandists in the world. They sometimes seem to go out of their way to show themselves in an unfavorable light. Anyhow, Romer left the country. Clark Kerr and Stanley went to the railroad station to see him off. Stanley gave Romer a carton of American cigarettes as a going-away party, while Clark Kerr gave him a bottle of scotch. The open rupture between the two countries is only the culmination of an underground diplomatic war that has been waging since the end of the First War. It is pretty difficult to bring their fundamental differences into the open because they have been so befogged by petty quarrels. If you look at the struggle objectively and realistically, the whole conflict boils down to power politics. It is a conflict between a first-rate power determined and able to wield overwhelming force and a second-rate state trying to perform a first-rate role with the aid of coalitions. Poland was afraid of Germany because the leaders of Germany were for the most part Prussians, and the Prussians have traditionally hated Poland. When Hitler came to power, Poland felt new hopes that she might get along with Germany. Hitler was an Austrian by origin, Goering a Bavarian, Goebbels a Rhinelander, and Hess came from a German family which had settled in Egypt. Poland was sure that these men would not be imbued with the anti-Polish feelings of the Prussians who had hitherto ruled Germany. Josef Lipski was the Polish ambassador to Germany then in 1934, and the Germans wooed him with soft words. In the Polish White Book, a collection of all official documents and arrangements concerning Polish, German, and Polish-Russian relations, Ambassador Lipski writes to his boss, Foreign Minister Beck, "Hitler said to me, the theory of hereditary German-Polish enmity is very unsound. In the history of our two countries, there have been periods of cooperation against a mutual danger threatening from the East. Russia had recently made great progress with her military preparations. The moment may come when both our countries might be compelled to defend ourselves against aggression from the East." Hitler told Lipski that in his opinion, the policy of former German governments, especially the Reichswehr, which had wished to unite with Russia against Poland, was unsound. He knew Bolshevism well, the Chancellor added. He had fought it from the very beginning, and he recalled his struggle against communism in Bavaria. Lipski apparently fell hard for Hitler. Josef Beck, always a hater of communism, too, listened to Hitler and felt like a poppy-like dream induced by the opium of his words. Then came the Polish-German Declaration of January 29, 1934. It was a beautiful document of less than 300 words, but what pretty words of neighborly love they were. Such phrases as the maintenance of a lasting peace between the two nations is an essential prerequisite for the general peace of Europe, abound in their declaration. It added, both governments announced their intention to settle directly all questions of whatever nature which concern their mutual relations. 4 days later, Hitler spoke in the Reichstag. He paid a glowing tribute to Marshal Pilsudski, and he would up his sweet speech by saying that the whole thing fills us with a special joy. And of course, Poland had a pact with Russia too, a non-aggression pact signed in 1932 and ratified in 1934, with the added provision that it would remain in force until 1945. She was officially at least on very good terms with her two big neighbors, and she could hardly be blamed if she had some wistful secret thoughts to the effect that she held the balance of power. Poland felt pretty comfortable now. Yeah, man, she had a partner, Big Germany. Hitler was her pal, and that nasty Stalin man had better not start anything. Pal Adolf would slap him down if he did. Meanwhile, Pal Adolf was bringing in German-born residents of Poland and showing them how to shoot little guns, how to undermine Polish authority, how to sabotage, how to organize a strong minority, so when the time came, it could handle a large, unorganized majority. Poland, thinking its nice declaration all sealed and tied with red ribbons, continued its complacent way. Complacency was the style in the 1930s anyhow. Then at 4:45 a.m., the morning of September the 1st, 1939, the complacency of Poland was disturbed by the roar of bombs dropped on the city of Westerplatte. Germany was waging its undeclared war on Poland, and the lovely 1934 declaration lay in the Foreign Office, gathering dust on its pretty red ribbons. In 10 days, Poland had folded up. Her resistance was heroic and futile, but Warsaw no longer existed as the capital of Poland. Her industrial areas melted before the mechanized strength of the man who had murmured such sweet nothings to Ambassador Lipski. For all practical purposes, the Polish government had ceased to exist. Poland melted before the Germans, and then on September the 17th, 1939, Russia moved her troops across the border into Poland. Poland was between the devil and the deep blue sea. It was a pitiable position, and the world sympathized. Russia undoubtedly moved only in self-defense. She needed the security which possession of those 76,500 miles would give her, should Germany ever attempt to invade her. Of course, Stalin used the sweet talk of diplomacy when he sent his troops into Poland. He said the Soviet government further cannot view with indifference the fact that the kindred Ukrainian and White Russian people who live on Polish territory and who are at the mercy of fate are left defenseless. On October the 29th, 1939, a plebiscite was held in the Russian-occupied territory, and the citizens voted a 90% majority to the Soviets. How accurate the count was, no one knows. Elections held under the shadows of guns are hardly ever strictly the will of the people, and there were Russian guns about. The Russians said that the population of the territory was about 12,800,000, of which 7 million were Ukrainians, 3 million White Russians, 1 million Poles, and 1 million Jews. Correspondents in Moscow think these figures are reasonably accurate. I have heard the same figures given in London, assuming them to be reasonably accurate. Perhaps the overwhelming vote was not out of line. In any case, the incorporation took place, and my bet will be that it is there to stay. Ethnographically, the Russians have an excellent case for keeping this territory, but we might as well be realistic about it. Russia wants the belt of land to act as a margin of safety against future aggression. Now, what can we say about this remarkable confection of mendacity? How many milled pews does it chalk up? Reynolds' pseudo-history is nowhere near the grand sweep of Depew's. Depew's tackles an entire century and fits it into a single triumphant cascade of victory with plenty of pomp and circumstance. Reynolds is chatty like one of your pals in the chow line of the mess, except armed with more statistics. He loves those numbers and dates and facts. If we were to rate these passages for sheer evil, however, I think Reynolds comes out ahead. After all, he is quite wholeheartedly engaged in the task of convincing Americans to overlook a mass murder ordered in a cold blood by a ruthless dictator during the aggressive conquest of a friendly nation. Poland being, of course, the country that World War II was at least nominally about. I'm afraid the old Bush lie people died line falls a little flat around this one. And yet you can tell that Reynolds has these little pangs of doubt. Unfortunately, he reveals just enough qualms to establish his mens rea without actually transmitting any actual skepticism to his actual audience. The clue is that for everything is a backup story, and sometimes a backup for the backup. The Kaitan massacre is the German propaganda. But even if it isn't German propaganda, the Poles are being awfully rude about the whole thing. The Soviets invaded Poland in self-defense, quite understandable, especially since the liberated peoples endorsed the intervention in a smashing landslide. Of course, one could never tell with these wartime plebiscites, but they are mostly Ukrainians and Belarusians anyway, so why wouldn't they be a part of the Soviet Union? And in any case, Russia needs to think of her safety. Note also how quickly Reynolds resorts to ridicule. This is a kind of, I might also add Logos. Notice how quickly Moldbug resorts to ridicule. There was a kind of pseudo-satirical humor of what would be humor if it was in any way funny. That is an unmistakable product of his time in Moscow. I call this trope crocodile humor after the Soviet humor magazine Crocodile. So Poland's diplomatic efforts in the 1930s are supposed to be just riotously funny, with all these sweet promises and fancy red ribbons on documents and drawers. Yet, as we see, Reynolds is just as capable of evoking the solemn brotherhood between nations and so on. Reynolds' pseudo-history may or may not be more evil than Depeau's. It is hard to judge these things, and I'm not sure it's worth trying, but it's certainly more modern and more effective. The International Press Corps of 2008 is more or less a direct descendant of Reynolds' We, and to that extent, they have been generational shifts. They have generally been leftward, e.g. from the Higgins generation to the Halberstam generation in Vietnam. And I don't think there is a journalistic trope in Reynolds that you don't see constantly in the papers today, though certainly many new tricks have been added to the book. Speaking of Nam, there is a funny exercise for the reader, a neoconservative history of Vietnam in a single op-ed, courtesy of a notorious neocon historian Arthur Herman. Is Herman trying to inform you or trying to mislead you? We can assume that, like Reynolds, Herman at least has his numbers straight. But what facts has he left out? If Herman's little essay was the only thing you knew about the American war in Vietnam, and you trusted it completely, what else do you think you ought to know that you don't? I said very little about Vietnam on this blog. I'm curious as to what people think. Okay, so the main thing here is he wants to pillory this World War II propaganda, which I wholeheartedly endorse. So that's all I'll say for this article. Anything, Logos? You're muted still.
I am muted still. Hi. It's all history stuff. I'm going to take your word for it. I have no idea what any of this was talking about. I'll be completely honest.
I'll give you the TLDR, Logos. Soviets murdered Polish officers after they invaded Poland. The Germans pointed it out. The Allies said the Germans were lying. Everybody now knows it was the Soviets, so Reynolds is full of S. That's the TLDR.
Got it. What does this have to do with bad history and reading bad history again?
Because this was, in hindsight, a clear example of fabricated, erroneous history. And I guess what Moldbug, to your point, was getting us familiar with it, right? So we would be able to identify it, not to refute it. So like, okay, how do you know it? Well, I'm going to show you something and you're going to read it. And then when you read what I show you, you'll see what it's like.
Got it.
That's the way I viewed it.
Makes sense.
It makes sense. I mean, that's actually pretty good. A theory of the ruling underclass. I'm just Moldbug, February the 14th, 2008. You, our readers, may appreciate a little tussle that TGGP and I got into over at Will Wilkinson's. I sort of felt that after this old exchange, some deep masochistic impulse of Will's was itching for another taste of the cane. We lay into him here. The R word is trotted out here, and some parting jabs are delivered here. I suspect that he cares to try us again. Mr. Wilkinson will definitely bring reinforcements. He has the whole Cato Institute, after all. Not to alarm you or anything, we are prepared. Should the black gates of Coke open and pour forth orc armies sworn to vengeance, I feel that the Beltway Urukai would do well to concentrate their intellectual firepower on the loose end that Wilkinson and Girton are left dangling at their first thread, which is the incontrovertible fact that the vast majority of chauvinist ethnocentrism in America today is not of the vanilla flavor that disturbs them so. If they can explain this, they can explain anything, and we should probably just surrender if they let us. For example, one of the most popular radio stations in San Francisco, at least to judge by the billboards I see, is called The Race. I'm especially fond of the URL, I am race. Yes, this means exactly what you think it means. Ethnic pride is one thing, hostility is another, but as progressives often observe, they tend to travel together. It strikes me as quite incontrovertible that if an alien anthropologist were to visit Earth and collate expressions of hostility towards human subpopulations in Western culture today, the overwhelming majority would be anti-European. Anti-Europeanism is widely taught in schools and universities today. Its converse most certainly is not. So here's my challenge for progressives, multiculturalists, dynamists, and the like. If your anti-racism is what it claims to be, if it is no more than Voltaire 3.0, why do non-European ethnocentrism and anti-European hostility not seem to bother you in the slightest? Do they maybe even strike you as slightly cool? How do you feel when you watch this video? Please try to express your answer in English, not Stalinist boilerplate. Trust us, we know the boilerplate answer. What's interesting, at least to this antisocial reactionary, if you're looking for another R word, I'll also answer to realist, is that anti-Europeanism is almost as hard to explain from the other side of the table. I am reasonably, if not comprehensively, familiar with the modern racist and white nationalist thought. I must say that it tends to leave me quite unsatisfied, especially as regards the real pathological motivations of Misers, Wilkinson, Gertner, et al. Are they, for instance, in the pay of the Jews? Well, I certainly cannot disprove this, or a variety of similar conjectures. I tend to doubt them. Occam's razor suggests that even if some multiculturalists are tools of the Mossad, surely the vast majority are perfectly sincere in their beliefs. The Rothschilds just don't have that much cash. If we work under the assumption that our opponents believe exactly what they say, we should account for at least most of them, then we can watch Stormfront go head-to-head with the Elders of Zion, which should be entertaining if nothing else. But wait, Logos, isn't much of Moldbug's work predicated on the fact that his opposition doesn't in fact mean what they say? He just opened up with, don't give me a boilerplate answer.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Literally, Logos, in the same essay, he contradicts himself. He's like, no, I don't want you to give me the boilerplate answer. Give me the real answer. And then he's like, well, actually, guys, maybe we should just trust the left that they're telling us what they really believe. Like, Logos, duct tape, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to reread that again later and see how he reconciles that. But that sounds bizarre.
I have an explanation. You might not like it. Feel free to offer your own. Let's step back a few light years and imagine we are that alien anthropologist. You know, what is it with like thought experiments and being an alien, Logos? Too much Star Trek?
Probably, yeah, actually.
I mean, you know what? Is this it? Is this it? Is Moldbug just Q? Is that what he is? Next generation Q?
No, no, he's a Ferengi.
Oh, yes. Okay. Our special interest is in multi-tribal societies. We are interested in human cultures in which multiple groups coexist more or less peacefully while retaining their identity as group members. As in all human societies, tribal identity is inherited by default. However, many cultures exhibit tribal mobility, so it's not as simple as that. Your tribe is just a set of people who see the world in the same way you do, whom you are comfortable socializing with, and with whom you instinctively side in any conflict. What we're interested in today is the interactions between identity and power in multi-tribal societies. Perhaps in some such societies, tribes confront each other on the basis of perfect harmony and equality. In others, however, one tribe is dominant and another subordinate. For example, when we look at medieval Europe, it should be very easy to see the nobles are dominant and villains, burghers, and such like trash are subordinate. When we look at the American South in 1840 or 1860 or 1930, it should be very easy to see that white people are dominant and black people are subordinate. We are not attempting to determine the correct relationship between tribes, just their actual present relationship. Well, right, Logos. We're not actually trying to determine whether the Communist Chinese Party should be in charge of China, just that Xi Jinping is formalist. That's all. Our goal.
Man.
Hey, you know, Stalin's formalist too, Logos. I don't know what the deal. What's his problem with Stalin? Did anybody have any doubts who was in charge in Stalinist Russia, Logos? Our goal is a test that works for any multi-tribal society, anywhere and anywhen. Let's call our tribes A and B, which is the dominant tribe, A or B. Perhaps we could ask the following 5 questions. Who is likely to be wealthier? A random A or a random B? In physical conflict between A's and B's, who is more likely to be the aggressor, A or B? Given equivalent circumstances, is the judicial system more aggressive in punishing offenses of A's against B's or vice versa? Given equivalent circumstances in economic competition between an A and a B, which is more likely to win? If you're looking for a government contractor position, an official distinction, or an educational opportunity, etc., it is better to be an A or B. It is more socially marginal for B to be rude to A or A to be rude to B. It is more likely that A's will insult B's or vice versa. Note that in my obvious examples, medieval Europe and the Old South, the results of the 5 questions are the same. Nobles and whites, respectively, are clearly dominant. But American society today produces a weird result. If we define whites and blacks as our tribes, whites win overwhelmingly on question 1, blacks overwhelmingly on questions 2 through 5. Perhaps the tribal differences are too broad, but isn't this an odd outcome? Not really. What it tells us is that inasmuch as conflict between whites and blacks can be influenced by the state's fist tends to fall on the black side of the scale, whereas the exceptional condition in question 1 is the result of those areas of social cooperation which are not controlled by the state. Oh, yeah, you see, that's 1. But remember, Logos, the economy is rigged by the state. That's actually something Moldbug complains about.
Yeah.
That's a little, I don't know, Logos. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Which part in particular? Sorry.
So he was saying if we define... okay, what it tells us is that inasmuch as conflicts between whites and blacks can be influenced by the state's fist tends to fall on the side of the blacks. Whereas the exceptional condition in question 1 is the result of those areas of social cooperation which are not yet controlled by the state. 1 is who was more likely to be wealthier.
I'm not sure about that. Scroll up just a little bit more. I don't think these 5 are referring to the same point necessarily.
Well, when he refers to 1 down here,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's referring to the 1 right up here.
Oh, he is, but I don't think he's saying... I think what he's saying is if you're just looking at a broad society generally and just saying, like, who's in power or something. But then, and then here what he's saying is there can be multiple contexts in which people can have power in different situations. So one is, yeah. So where the state seems to be getting involved, he's claiming that the blacks are the more dominant, and then only under informal systems are the whites more dominant.
Right. I guess you could think in terms of the middle class. That's where you have that's where a lot of the white conservative power would be.
Exactly, especially informal things like clubs and handshakes and things like that.
True. All right. Why do white people tend to be wealthier than black people? This could be the result of A, a pre-existing distribution of property inherited from an era when the state sided with white people. B, a secret conspiracy of white people to team up against their swarthy foes. Or C, independent variables such as genetics or culture, which tend to make whites producers of higher cost labor than blacks. Or, of course, all 3. Whatever your answer to the question, I doubt anything I could say would change it. But I think more interesting and less explored question is why does the state side with the side it sides with? What possible motivation could it have for favoring blacks over whites? How could this strange phenomena of the ruling class develop? Now obviously we're a good deal more advanced in time than we were in 2008. But the one thing here that I want to say that this, because I know the progressives are going to say A, pre-existing distribution of property. But what nobody seems to realize is that this is all just an accident of history because subsequent generations got screwed over, and white people whoever survives the population collapse that's going to hit America, white people are not going to necessarily have a lot of extra wealth because it was all consumed by the boomers.
Right.
Right. So this idea of inherited white wealth is just stupid. Like, millennials and Zoomers aren't getting any of it. Now, in 2008, that might have been hard to see, but I think some people were seeing it. But it's funny, right? This is from 2008, and this question would still be as relevant now as it was then.
I agree.
And which just shows you how dumb the political meta is, because this shouldn't be a relevant question anymore.
No.
I mean, you literally have had now, especially with Gen Z, white people growing up in poverty on par with blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And so this distinction doesn't really, well, historic black poverty, this doesn't really make sense anymore. But and this paragraph we had here, why would they favor blacks over whites? I don't know which way Moldbug's going to go, but the way I was going to go is going back to the Whole Foods heat map, right? You go for the minorities to disrupt any sort of ability to organize of the main population.
Yeah.
And so this is just one more example of that. Moldbug might go that route. I'm not sure, so we'll see. Of course, we know the official answer. The official answer is that Washington is good and sweet and true, and while it loves all its children, it loves the poorest most of all. In other words, modulo a few foibles and imperfections which can no doubt be corrected or changed by electing Senator Obama. What we are looking at here is the kingdom of Christ on earth, Blake's New Jerusalem, in D.C.'s green and swampy land. Mr. Wilkinson and his ilk certainly do not cease from mental fight, though I have to say their swords could be a little less sleepy in their hands. I'm sure after a quick breather, they'll be right back at us. We can't discount the answers too far, because we are assuming that our opponents are sincere. We must assume that this story is what they actually believe. Our goal is not to uncover their subconscious twisted desires or their evil secret plots. We can accept that a large number of people many quite intelligent and thoughtful, do believe in the official explanation of why Washington actually acts as it does. Similarly, since the beast is after all a democracy, the existence of this support base goes a long way towards explaining Washington's actions. But where did this whole crazed feedback loop come from? The idea that it's just peachy for the state to systematically favor some of its citizens over others, simply on the account of their skin color, is both A, ludicrous in my own humble opinion, and B, wildly inconsistent with many other beliefs which happen to be held by the exact same people. Granted, history holds many examples of ludicrous beliefs held by large populations for long periods of time, but nonsense tends to decay, as I hope the linked discussions show. It does not do well on a level playing field with sanity. Yet, if anything, the diversity movement is only tightening its grip. This story, though quite euphemistic, may provide some flavor. Maoist-style struggle sessions, albeit without the airplane position, or forced agricultural labor are becoming a routine part of young Americans' coming-of-age experience. Indoctrinating students to resist European chauvinism was one thing, perhaps even defensible in a Platonist sense. But that time has passed. Routine inculcation in 80-proof anti-Europeanism is the new thing. And I, for one, find it quite unusual. It may not be the worst thing in the world, but it surely calls for an explanation. Our first step is to agree that blacks and whites are lousy tribal categories, that they happen to be categories that the Washington uses when applying its suspiciously fist-like thumb to the scale means very little. White and black are not tribal identities by the standard I've defined above. For example, a new survey of black Americans reveals that almost half are willing to agree with the suggestion that blacks are becoming two separate races. This is certainly absurd in terms of actual human biology, but given the quantity of black chauvinism in the marketplace of ideas at present, it's quite remarkable. It can be interpreted only in tribal terms. Earlier in UR, I suggested a 5-caste taxonomy of American society and described the conflict of American politics as the struggle of 3 of these castes, Brahmins, dalit, helots, against the other 2 optimates, Vaisyas. For those whose time is short, Brahmins are intellectuals, dalits are what Marx called the lumpen proletariat, and helots are unskilled laborers. Optimates are the older upper-crust aristocracy and vices of the petty bourgeoisie. These castes correspond to social status, not tribe. However, each of the top 3 castes is more or less tribeless. Classic ethnic tribalism is a sure mark of dalit or helot status. As far as I can tell, in 2008, there's very little chauvinism even among Vaisyas. Among dalits and helots, race matters again. However, despite certain Jackie Chan movies, there's no such thing as an interracial gang. There are non-trivial members of blacks in each cast. Yes, there are black optimists. However, an obvious interpretation of the two races seen by the Pew survey is that black optimists and Vaisya see themselves and black Brahmins as one race and black Dalits and in dwindling numbers Helots as another. Black Brahmins believe, like all Brahmins, that everyone should be like them and eventually will be. I have no idea what Dalits and Helots think, but I suspect they have a fairly low survey participation rate. Actually, some light has just been shed on this issue by one Sudhir Venkatsa. Cowan's review is the best I could find, but it really does not do justice to this appalling book. I'd recommend that you buy it, but unfortunately this rewards the author who deserves no such thing. Maybe the library is your best bet. Rather cleverly, the Times picked for its excerpt a rather inoffensive bit from Chapter 4. I suspect this is the best. Their styled manual is rather strict about the N-word. Styled manual is rather strict about the N-word as well. This means you two commenters, so I will describe it as ninja, plural ninjas. Our hero, a first-year grad student in sociology at Chicago, whose advisor is William Julius Wilson, has chosen, presumably banking on his rather dark epidermis, to visit the infamous Robert Taylor Holmes and perform a social survey. His question, I swear I'm not making this up, though he might be, is how does it feel to be black and poor? I still suspect he was a victim of some awful grad student's joke. By now, I was used to being observed carefully when I walked around a black neighborhood. Today was no different. As I approached one of the Lake Park projects, 5 or 6 young men stared me down. It should be said here that I probably deserved to be stared at. I was just a few months removed from a long stretch of time I'd spent following the Grateful Dead, and I was still under the spell of Jerry Garcia and his band of merrymakers. With my ponytail and tie-dye shirt, I must have looked pretty out of place. I tended to speak in spiritually laden language, mostly about the power of road trips. The other grad students in my department saw me as a bit naive and more than a little loopy. Looking back, I can't say they were wrong. But I wasn't so naive that I couldn't recognize what was going on in the lobby of the building that I now approached. Customers were arriving, black and white, by car and on foot, hurrying inside to buy their drugs and then hurry back out. I wasn't sure if this building was number 4040, and I couldn't find the number anywhere, so I just walked inside. The entryway smelled of alcohol, soot, and urine. Young men stood and crouched on plastic milk crates, a couple of them stomping their feet against the cold. I put my head down, took a breath, and walked past them quickly. Their eyes felt heavy on me as I passed. One huge young man, 6'6" at least, chose not to move an inch as I passed. I brushed against them and nearly lost my balance. There was a long row of beaten-up metal mailboxes, many of them missing their doors. Water was dripping everywhere, puddling on the ground. Shouts and shrieks cascade down from the higher floors, making the whole building feel like some kind of vibrating catacomb. And once I got past the entryway, it was darker. I could make out the elevator, but I seemed to be losing any peripheral vision, and I couldn't find the button. I sensed that I was still being watched and that I ought to press the button fast, but I groped around in vain. Then I started looking for the stairwell, but I couldn't find that either. To my left was a large barrier of some kind, but I was too nervous to go around it. To my right was a corridor. I decided to go that way, figuring I'd come across a stairwell or at least a door to knock on. As I turned, a hand grabbed my shoulder. "What's up, my man? You got some business in here?" He was in his 20s, about as tall and dark as I was. His voice was deep and forceful, but matter of fact, as if he asked the same question regularly. He wore baggy jeans, a loose-fitting jacket, and a baseball cap. His earrings sparkled as he did the gold on his front teeth. A few other young men dressed the same stood behind him. I told them that I was there to interview families. "No one lives here," he said. "I'm doing a study for the university," I said, "and I have to go to apartments 610 and 703. Ain't nobody living in those apartments for the longest," he said. "Well, do you mind if I just run up there and knock on the door?" "Yeah, we do mind," he said. I tried again. "Maybe I'm in the wrong building. Is this 4040? He shook his head. "No one lives there, so you won't be talking to anybody." I decided I'd better leave. I walked back through the lobby, bag and clipboard in hand. I crossed in front of the building, over an expansive patch of dead grass littered with soda cans and broken glass. I turned around and looked at the building. A great many of the windows were lit. I wondered why my new friend had insisted that the building was uninhabited. Only later did I learn that the gang members routinely rebuffed all sorts of visitors with this line: "No one by that name lives here." They would try to prevent social workers from coming inside and interrupting their drug trade. The young men from the building were still watching me, but they didn't follow. As I came up the next high rise, I saw the faint markings on the pale yellow brick, number 4040. At least I know I was in the right place. The lobby here was empty, so I quickly skirted past another set of distressed mailboxes and passed through another dank lobby. The elevator was entirely missing. There was a big cavity where the door should have been, and the walls were thick with graffiti. As I started to climb the stairs, the smell of urine was overpowering. On some floors, the stairwells were dark, and others there were a muted glow. I walked up 4 flights, maybe 5, trying to keep count, and then I came upon a landing where a group of young men, high school age, were shooting dice for money. "Ninja, what are you doing here?" one of them shouted. I'm trying to make out their faces, but in the fading light, I could barely see anything. I tried to explain. "I'm a student of the university doing a survey, and I'm looking for some families." The young man rushed up to me within inches of my face. Again, someone asked what I was doing here. I told them the number of the apartments I was looking for. They told me that no one lived in the buildings. Suddenly, some more people showed up, a few of them older than the teenagers. One of them, a man about my age with an oversized baseball cap, grabbed my clipboard and asked what I was doing. I tried to explain, but he just didn't seem interested. He kept adjusting his too big hat as it fell over his face. "Julio over here says he's a student," he told everyone. His tone indicated he didn't believe me. Then he turned back to me. "What do you represent?" "Represent?" I asked. "Come on, Ninja," one of the younger men shouted. "We know you're with somebody. Just tell us who." Another one laughed, pulled something out of his waistband. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but then it caught a glint of light, and I could see that it was a gun. He moved it around and pointed it at my head once in a while and muttered something over and over. "I'll take him," he seemed to be saying. Then he smiled. "You don't want to be messing with the kings," he said. I just tell you what you know." "Hold on, Ninja," another said. He was holding a knife with a 6-inch blade. He began twirling it around and his fingers on the handle spinning in his palm, and the strangest thing came over me. "That's the exact same knife my friend Brian used to dig a hole for our tent in the Sierra Nevadas." "Let's have some fun with this boy," he said. "Come on, Julio, where you live? On the east side, right? You don't like the west side Mexicans. You flip right or left, 5 or 6. You run with the kings, right? You know you're going to find out, so you might as well tell us." "Kings or sharks? Flip right or left, 5 or 6. It appeared that I was Julio, the Mexican gang member from the east side. It wasn't clear yet if this was a good or bad thing. 2 of the younger men started to search my bag. They pulled out the questionnaire sheets, pen and paper, a few sociology books, my keys. Someone else patted me down. The guy with the too big hat who had taken my clipboard looked over the papers and then handed everything back to me. He told me to go ahead and ask a question. But now I was sweating despite the cold. I leaned backward to get some light to follow on the questionnaire. The first question was one I had adapted from several other similar surveys. It was one of a set of questions that targeted young people's self-perceptions. "How does it feel to be black and poor?" I read. Then I gave the multiple choice questions. Very bad, somewhat bad, neither bad nor good, somewhat good, very good. The guy with the too big hat began to laugh, which prompted the others to start giggling. "Screw you," he told me. "You're going to be kidding me." He turned away and muttered something that made everyone laugh uncontrollably. They went back to quarreling about who I was. They talked so fast that I couldn't easily follow. It seemed they were as confused as I was. I wasn't armed. I didn't have tattoos. I wasn't wearing anything that showed allegiance to any other gang. I didn't wear a hat turned around the left or right, for instance. I wasn't wearing blue or red. I didn't have a star insignia anywhere, either the 5 or 6 point variety. 2 of them started to debate my fate. "If he's here and he don't get back," said one, "you know they're going to come looking for him." "Yeah, and I'm going to get the first shot," said the other. "Last time I had to watch this crib. This time I'm getting in the chair and the car. I'm shooting some ninja. These Mexicans aren't afraid of crap. They'll kill each other into prison over nothing. You better let me handle it, boy. You don't even speak Mexican." "Man, I bet a whole bunch of them in jail. I killed 3 just the other day." As their claims escalated, so did their insults. "Yeah, but your mama spoke Mexican when I was with her." "Ninja, your daddy was a Mexican." I sat down on a cold concrete step. I struggled to follow what they were talking about. A few of them seemed to think that I was an advanced scout from a Mexican gang conducting reconnaissance for a drive-by attack. From what I could glean, it seemed as if some black gangs were aligned with certain Mexican gangs, but in other cases, the black gangs and Mexican gangs were rivals. They stopped talking when a small entourage entered the stairwell. At the front was a large man, powerfully built, but with a boyish face. He also looked to be about my age, maybe a few years older, and he radiated calm. He had a toothpick or maybe a lollipop in his mouth, and it was obvious from his carriage that he was the boss. He checked out everyone who was on the scene as if making a mental list of what each person was doing. His name was JT, and while I couldn't have known it at this moment, he was about to become the most formidable person in my life for a long time to come. JT asked the crowd what was happening, but no one could give him a straight answer. Then he turned to me. What are you doing here? He had a few glittery gold teeth, a sizable diamond earring, and a deep, hollow eyes that fixed on mine without giving anything away. Once again, I started to go through my spiel. I was a student at the university. You speak Spanish? He asked. No. Someone shouted out, but he probably speaks Mexican. Ninja, shut up, JT said. Then someone mentioned my questionnaire, which seemed to catch his interest. He asked me to tell him about it. I explained the project as best I could. It was being overseen by a national poverty expert. I said with the goal of understanding the lives of young black men in order to design better public policy. My role, I said, was very basic, conducting surveys to generate data for the study. There was an eerie silence when I finished. Everyone stood waiting, watching JT. He took the questionnaire from my hand, barely glanced at it, then handed it back. Everything he did, every move he made was deliberate and forceful. I read him the same question that I had read the others. How he didn't laugh, but he smiled. How does it feel to be black and poor? I'm not black, he answered, looking around at the others knowingly. Well, then how does it feel to be African American and poor? I tried to sound apologetic, worried that I'd offended him. I'm not African American either. I'm a ninja. Now, I don't know what to say. I certainly didn't feel comfortable asking him how it felt to be a ninja. Anyway, you get the drift. First of all, how can a guy just like block quote people and that's apparently a blog? You know how many block quotes we've had to read over the last year?
A lot.
That's not a blog. Like you can't just block quote people and say that's your blog.
Well, he's providing some commentary.
Some.
We'll see where he goes with it. I'm really confused.
I mean, it's bizarre and weird. I think the best way to read this paragraph is that scientific social planners trying to solve real world issues is nonsense because they have no idea what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing.
But other than that, I don't know what he's... Okay, anyway, you get the drift. I must say that I find whatever this guy's presentation a little novelistic for me to trust that the above actually happened as he writes it, but I'm sure the general concept is about right. As the book goes on and our hero spends more time with his new met idol, we learn that JT's Cracking Gang, a chapter of the Black Kings, exercises all the traditional attributes of sovereignty over his turf and the homes. He collects taxes, defines laws, dispenses savage punishment, etc. He has a fairly good working relationship with the Chicago police and with the matriarchal figures who interface with the housing authority. Perhaps most interestingly, he also has connections through ex-gangsters who run youth programs with the Chicago Democratic machine, i.e. the same basic operation that gave us Barack Obama. Yes, we can. I'm not sure how many degrees of separation there are between Senator Obama and the nearest JT, but I'd sure be surprised if it was more than 2. We are now in a better position to appreciate the weird alliance of the Brahmin and Dalit. First, it's just clearly a more accurate description of the power dynamic than simply saying that all of Washington, or even just the whole Democratic Party, is allied with blacks. David Petraeus surely cares nothing for this sordid spectacle, nor are the fastest appearing blue-collar union voters. I'm sure enthralled with the vision of JT. And it's also very clear that the kind of policies by which Washington favors blacks, such as preferential admissions and employment, are not designed to reward the likes of John McWhorter, Richard Parsons, Colin Powell, or in fact anyone with a name like John or Richard or Colin. Progressives are not animated by some weird fetish for dark skin. Well, actually, Logos, they are. And it's 1945 against, what was it? I think it was against racism or something like that, written by George Orwell. Sorry, against nationalism, that's it. He talks about liberals having exactly this. Progressives have a strange fetish for black people. He goes into detail. So I'll take Orwell over Moldbug on this one.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they cannot pay off dalits without paying off African Americans, vices or Brahmins, or even Optimate clearly troubles them. Yes, I said pay off. What do you think they're talking about here? Lawn tennis? Occam's razors, kids. Diversity is a mechanism by which a political party compensates its supporters with the oldest rewards in the book, jobs and perks and rank. It's called patronage. It's evil, criminal, and corrupt. Except when Moldbug has a patronage network, huh, Logos?
Well, I mean, if Moldbug wins and the state becomes a giant CEO company, right? Every job is going to have to be filled by somebody. So, I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, what is the difference? Everyone involved in this racial spoil system, black or white or blue or polka dotted, should go directly to jail, and the intellectuals should, as Victor Kempler put it, but why spoil the suspense? A nation mad of a race indeed. In fact, gang is not really the right word for the Black Kings and their like. It soft pedals the problem. What we're looking at here is perhaps better defined as a militia. What's the difference between JT and Muqtada al-Sadr? One of them lives in Iraq. It's actually even worse than that. You know, that's actually not a bad analogy. Do you remember Spike Lee Logos did that parody film Chirac?
Mm-hmm.
Where he literally makes that connection, so it's actually not too far off here.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that they are both tribal chauvinist criminal militias and they both discharge their weapons in the urban sidearm position, the BKs and the Jasha al-Mahdi have something else in common. While they have plenty of guns and plenty of people willing to use them, neither is militarily capable of actually resisting any actual modern army. They are not true sovereigns, they are dependents, puppet states in a sense. Since the entire planet is at least nominally controlled by actual modern armies, no such militia can exist without political protector. And in fact, there is exactly one political organization which prevents the military destruction of both the BKs and the JAM. I don't think we need two guesses as to what organization that might be. But in case there's any doubt, here's the reliably egregious Barbara Ehrenreich on our back cover. Gang leader for a day is not another voyeuristic look into the supposedly tawdry, disorganized life of the Black Poor. Venkatesh entered the Chicago gang world at the height of the crack epidemic, and what he found was a tightly organized community held together by friendship and compassion as well as force. I couldn't stop reading and ended up loving this brave, reckless young scholar, as well as the gang leader JT, who has to be one of the greatest characters ever to emerge from something that could be called sociological research. Gentlemen, I rest my case. So this is the Brahmin Dalit Alliance. By the way, okay, I actually have to look this up. Hold on. Orwell's against nationalism, because what that little clip we just read was so just proves it. I mean, the liberal Jewish woman is just basically having this like weird fetish moment with this book review. So let me read to you what Orwell actually says. Color feeling. The old style contempt attitude towards natives has been much weakened in England, and various pseudo-scientific theories emphasizing the superiority of the white race have been abandoned. Among the intelligentsia, color feeling only occurs in the transposed form. That is, a belief in the innate superiority of the colored races. This is now increasingly common among English intellectuals, probably resulting more from masochism and sexual frustration than from contact with the Oriental and Negro nationalist movements. Even among those who do not feel strongly on the colored question, snobbery and imitation have a powerful influence. Almost any English intellectual would be scandalized by the claim the white races are superior to the colored, whereas the opposite claim would seem to him unexceptionable, even if he disagreed with it. Nationalistic attachment to the colored races is usually mixed up with the belief that their sex lives are superior, and there is a large underground mythology about the sexual prowess of Negroes. So, no, I mean, Orwell explains why this is the case. Okay, back to Moldbug. So this is the Brahmin Dalit Alliance, perhaps the most sordid and cynical partnership since Molotov and Ribbentrop clenched over Stoli and mums all dressed up in robes of love, screamed into the heads of freshmen, and caroled on YouTube by the composer who brought us My Humps. Yes, we can bring it on. But wait, we've seen what JT gets out of the deal, money and security. A lot of government checks end up in his pocket. But what did the progressives get out of their Machiavellian pact with barbarism? Murder and urine-soaked hallways? What could be worth this opprobrium? Well, first we have to ask what opprobrium. I actually had an interesting experience with my attempts to review Gang Leader for a Day. My goal was to answer the following question. Did Venkatesh change the name of his gang? Or is there actually an actual organization in Chicago called the Black Kings? I think there is, but I'm not quite sure. If you try to Google, you'll see that almost every searchable reference to the Black Kings gives us Venkatesh's book. Eventually, I found this link, Who Runs Chicago? Indeed. Note the 5-pointed star almost makes its appearance. Reproducible results, boys and girls, social science at its finest. But clearly our beloved official press, the people we call responsible journalists, have much more interest interesting things to write about than the racist militias which have conquered and devastated much of Chicago, not to mention pretty much all of Detroit. I know I'm starting to sound like the devil, but really, all these people need to be in jail. Every last one of them. Could you say, yeah, French, whatever. I knew you could. But I haven't answered the question. Why this affection? Why are progressives so deeply fond of their dalits? Venkatesh is a little more circumspect than Ehrenreich, but still, when he describes his meeting with JT, you have a kind of vibe. It's not sexual. Logos, that's exactly what the vibe is. This is really annoying me. But it almost is. JT exudes a wave of power, of leadership and stability and pure masculine strength, and Venkatesh is definitely feeling it. It's actually quite reminiscent of the way Albert Speer in his memoir talks about his patron. As Speer puts it, one seldom recognizes the devil when he was his hand on your shoulder. In the Brahmin-Dalit alliance, it's not quite clear whose hand is on whose shoulder, but the adversary is definitely in the building. If the Robert Taylor Holmes aren't, hell, what is? Imagine if, say, Jonah Goldberg had this kind of relationship with the Aryan Brotherhood. The great lie of American political system is that it's symmetrical. There's no symmetry between progressives and conservatives. They have roughly the same relationship that Coco the gorilla had with her pet cats. What the Dalit Alliance gives progressives is more than just a vote bank. This term is one of the few good products of Indian politics since the Raj. It should be much more widely known. What the Dalits are is muscle, a mob, militia, a mob. And if you don't think that a paramilitary gang is an asset for a political party, your friends in the universities have not educated you well. Historically, democracies in which parties have no muscle at all are very much the exception. I'm sure JT and his muscle boys would get along perfectly with Milo and Claudius, for example. Did I mention the universities? Oh no, we aren't done here. If you can't stand to read blue text or in black, take a look at this letter. If you can't bear it, at least scroll to the end. Up against the wall, this is a stick-up. What do you think the universities are full of progressives? Why? Well, I don't know, Logos. Maybe it's because all the curricula is provided by Wall Street.
Well, it's also an accident of history, right? I mean, you saw a lot of the big divergence in academia when Reagan gave that those who can do, those who can't teach speech. And there's been a big assault on education by Republicans for a long time. And so what you see a bunch of divergence. And the thing is, once institutions start becoming too polarized one way or another, it becomes a self-fulfilling thing where it just gets worse and worse and worse, as we see on the internet all the time.
True that. Okay, let's see. If you are progressive, it is because universities are truth machines and progressives speak the truth. Indeed, they speak truth to power. Or is it the other way around? Sometimes I wonder. Mark Rudd stayed expelled, and perhaps to his credit, he put his Semtex where his mouth was and became a terrorist. He did no time for any of his crimes. Like so many of his Cultural Revolution co-conspirators, he is now an elder statesman of the progressive movement, much sought after for interviews. Grayson Kirk managed to last another 6 months at Columbia before he was forced out, which may be the longest that any university held out against the revolution. The old line establishment was doomed everywhere. What was it going to do? Call up Bull Connor and ask to borrow some of his police dogs? These days, Leroy Jones Goes, of course, by Amari Barca, and as for Columbia, it now plays home to Venkatesh himself. Well, you're talking about real power here. In a democracy, the state is guided by public opinion. Who guides public opinion guides the state. Who guides political opinion? Journalists and teachers, and who guides them? Well, Columbia, for one, rocket science it ain't. As Tom Hayden put it in the Port Huron statement, from where else can power and vision be summoned? We believe that the universities are an overlooked seat of influence. First, the university is located in a permanent position of social influence. Its educational function makes it indispensable and automatically makes it a crucial institution in the formation of social attitudes. Second, in an unbelievably complicated world, it is the central institution for organizing, evaluating, and transmitting knowledge. Third, the extent to which the academic resources presented presently is to use to buttress immoral social practices, revealed first by the fact to which defense contracts make the universities engines of the arms race. Two, the use of modern social science as a manipulative tool reveals itself in the human relations consultants to the modern corporation who introduced trivial soaps SOPs to give laborers feelings of participation or belonging, while actually diluting them in order to further exploit their labor. And of course, the use of motivational research is already infamous as a manipulative aspect of American politics. But these social uses of the university's resources also demonstrate the unchangeable reliance by men of power on the men in storehouses of knowledge. This makes the university functionally tied to the society in new ways, revealing new potentialities, new levers for change. Fourth, the university is the only mainstream institution that is open to participation by individuals of nearly any viewpoint. These, at least, are facts, no matter how dull the teaching, how paternalistic the rules, how irrelevant the research that goes on. Social relevance, the accessibility to knowledge, and internal openness, these together make the university a potential base and agency in a movement of social change. If history has any lessons, is that when your enemy announces precisely how he's going to defeat you, you should probably listen. So muscle matters, or at least it mattered in '68. The irony, of course, is that the progressives and the gangs never really managed to cooperate effectively. Threatening Grace and Kirk with an all-out race war in Upper Manhattan must have been quite exciting, but coming from the likes of Mark Rudd, it rather reminds one of Owen Glendower. I can call spirits from the vasty deep. They were called often indeed, and sometimes they even came, but not reliably, and in the end the sorcerers and their spirits lost interest and drifted apart, as lovers often do. The glory days of Lenny and the Panthers are long gone, which is, in a way, one of the funniest things about Venkatesh's book. The racist militias are still there. They are doing better than ever, perhaps. In the end, the Robert Taylor homes did get demolished, but there are plenty more like them, and the buildings are not the problem. But no one is talking to them. The command circuit is cut. Professor Wilson, Venkatesh's advisor, is supposed to be an expert on black dalits. In fact, he is terrified that a student is actually going down to the homes and hanging out with them. He is afraid of the liability, and he probably should be. In fact, it's pretty clear that none of the author's peers in sociology today, who are all, I'm sure, immensely jealous, could in any way repeat the experiment. That is why the wonderful world of 2008, with its iPhones and everything, still contains black kings. It's nothing more than nostalgia if the racist Republican pig cops tried to roll up the Democrats' underprivileged community organizations. I'm sure they would get nowhere, which may be why they don't even try. But in 2008, would it do any serious damage to the progressive movement? I am confident that it wouldn't. Defending criminals is just a reflexive for today's progressives. The progressives no longer need muscle. They are in the saddle. They are no more Grace and Kirks, let alone Bull Hunters. What they need now is votes, and the biggest vote bank of all is just south of the border. Immigration will keep the progressives in power for the next century. Whoa! Logos! If immigration will keep progressives in power for the next century, why is he telling people today to just wait for the dark elf seduction tactics?
It's a good question. Well, because the progressives will still have power. They'll just be seduced to use their power for the rebellious thing.
I mean, this is why Moldbug is a complete bad faith actor. He knows full well what the arc of history is going to be if we follow his advice.
Mm-hmm.
They have always been the American PRI, and they always will be. And I haven't even stated my theory yet. Fortunately, it's not my theory. It's a very old one. Perhaps it even predates Mencius himself. It came from China, so he would recognize it. And it has a catchy name, Yi Yi Zi Yi. This roughly translated as using the barbarians to control the barbarians. Typically, the implication is that when you have a problem with some tribe of barbarians, what you need to do is look for a bunch of even nastier barbarians and sick them on the original barbarians. Ideally, the nastier barbarians are so barbaric that they are not conceivably a threat to you, the sophisticated mandarins of the Middle Kingdom, but still nasty enough to distract your real enemies on the frontiers. You have even learned to read and write or something. When the Romans unleashed the Huns against the Germans, it was a classic case of Yi Yi Zi Yi. Does this remind anyone of the real meaning of diversity? I'd like to think it's obvious, but perhaps I should just spell it out. Basically, the Brahmins have every possible Machiavellian interest in encouraging an invasion of third world barbarians. The more, the nastier, the better. Their hereditary enemy is the native barbarian, the half-civilized Vaisya. The ignorant, megachurched, oaky redneck, the Huckabee voter, the Bircher, and the McCarthyite, American Firster and Calvin and Coolidge voter. In the dim, distant past, the specter of Davis Lee and Ben Hill loomed grimly up. They will take all the Huns they can get against this breed of barbarian. They are quite aware that if their real enemies ever seize real power, it's lamppost time. Huns are not available these days, but JT is. And if the nationalist nativist American right ever regrows some little pocket of testicular tissue, he is one more speed bump they'll have to go through on their way to DC. It never hurts to have a few more well-armed thugs on your team, at least not if you're a progressive and you believe in peace and love and hugs and puppies. Yes, we can. You see, this is really weird, Logos, because he seems to be criticizing the progressives for this as if it's a bad thing. But when the American first types rose up in 2021, oh my, stop the press.
Mm-hmm.
Now he sides with the progressives.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm not saying that people who believe in peace and love, etc., actually thought up this strategy and have secret meetings where they gloat about how well it's all working. They don't need to. However, they explain it to themselves. Yee Z is what they're doing, and you can't exactly call it a failure. Do you watch the Mandela video? The man next to Mandela is Joe Slovo, one of his South African leading progressive activists in the liberation struggle, or as you might say, communist terrorists. Do you wonder why this pasty-faced fellow is comfortable in a crowd full of people chanting "Kill the whites"? Actually, the captions on the video are mistranslated. The word in the song is Amabulu, a Xhosa racial slur, which refers to not all whites, but specifically to Afrikaners, which Slovo, being a cosmopolitan Anglophone, is most definitely not. So the crowd is essentially chanting "Kill the rednecks," i.e. Slovo's hereditary tribal enemies. No wonder he has a smile on his face. Yee, yee, zee, yee. Okay, Logos, what do we want to say about this one?
I'm as confused I am as the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the most pernicious legacies of Moldbug is treating this problem as if there isn't an active plan behind all of this. It's just what it is, guys. Come on, it's just an emergent property, just these developing environmental conditions. Don't be crazy here.
Yep.
Alrighty, this is gonna be a long one, and we might have to put a bookmark in it here. So, because we'll be here till like, I don't know, well after 6. Do you think we can get it done by 6? Look how long this is.
No.
No, there's no way. There's no way.
There's no way.
But on the plus side, Logos, we are slowly inching closer to a letter to an open-minded progressives.
Yeah, it's about time.
How much longer do we have? Let's see here. This one is democracy is historical phenomenon. Oh, that'll be rich. Okay, let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. So we are 4 essays away from an open letter to an open-minded progressive part 1. We're getting close.
So not next week, but the week after is a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're getting close. But I don't know. I mean, how can we summarize these essays? Like what's holding it again, Logos, what is holding this together?
Nothing that I'm seeing. Like I said last week, like in 2007, there were clear arcs about like clusters of topics you want to talk about. You can see how his thinking is moving through as he moves through the essays. For these essays, it's just like a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah. And a lot of block quotes. Like, bro.
A lot of block quotes.
And then it's not even real commentary. It's just like, a one-liner gotcha and then back to his own thoughts. It's like the laziest way to write a blog, too.
Yeah, kinda. Like we were supposed to be looking for, like, in this one, for example, we're supposed to be looking for an explanation as to why the progressives like the underclass castes, he calls them. I don't remember, the dalits or whatever. And we get this giant story about the sociologist meeting with a bunch of gang leaders, right? And like at the end of the story, the only explanation seems to be out of it's just like, well, there's a sexual but not sexual really tension between like these people. But then he also goes on to say that like most sociologists don't even talk to these people. It's like that can't be the reason. Like that guy who wrote the book was a pariah, so to speak, because his advisor afraid it was like a security risk, like a liability risk. And so, like, most of the people in academia don't talk to these people. Well, if they don't talk to these people, this kind of tension that he's drawing forth analogically can't be the reason they like him if they don't really talk to him, interact with him in the same way that this guy did. So, like, how was it even relevant? I don't know. I'm more confused than before I read the story. They're supposed to give me an idea.
Yeah, I mean, Moldbug says that they're being used as muscle.
Sure.
Sure, but I mean, okay. Here's the thing, though. Right? He started this whole essay off by saying, "Why does the government put its thumb on the scale against white people?" And the thing is, that's not a sufficient explanation because,
No.
for example, Chicago in the 1890s was run by the Italian mob.
Right.
But did the Democratic Party have an Italian fetish? No, it didn't.
No.
No, I mean, you play ball with the guy in charge, but you don't change all the laws to favor Italians.
Right.
New York was won by the Irish. Think of Gangs in New York, right? The movie. Did they change the laws to be favorable? No. On the contrary, the Irish were still fighting to get in.
Yep.
So even with the muscle argument, that's not a sufficient reason to explain this differential treatment of like siding with the blacks.
Yeah.
Again, that's not nearly enough. I think the theory that I have of a divided workplace, a divided country, using the Whole Foods heat map is a better explanation. But again, it's weird. It's just like I don't understand where he's going with some of these things. It's like, or like the math equation for like why voting's pointless.
It's so goofy. If your domain isn't an algebraic structure, it just doesn't even make sense to talk about linear maps. What is he doing?
He's doing what Moldbug does best, making Logos and I confused.
Yeah, I guess so.
Let's see. Any other commentary on what we just read? The other thing is, okay, was it Chicago? Was that where that Indian dude went to interview the gang leaders?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that was 2008. Well, in 1908, they were all Italians.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, Italian gangs were running the show. So I guess the question that you'd have to, you see, at least with regards to Chicago, it's not like, if we take Moldbug's theory here, then we have to assume that in the early 20th century, whoever was in charge of Chicago at the time was in cahoots with the Italians to bring them in as muscle to run Chicago. Like, that's not how the Italians got there.
No.
And that's not even how the blacks got there, right? After World War II, they went north to find jobs in the industrial sector.
Mm-hmm.
In, the Great Migration. That's where the good. Well, this was before the Rust Belt, right? There were still good manufacturing jobs in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's problematic. I'll just say that. So yeah, that's all we got for today, everybody. Thanks again, Logos, for showing up. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.